Next, we will look for an approval of the meeting agenda.
This is Judy. I make a motion to approve the agenda.
This is Bethany. I'll second.
I'll call for the vote.
Judy, aye.
Barb, aye.
Bethany, aye.
And Lynn, aye. Next is the approval of the June 1st, 2023 public hearing minutes, construction technology CUP amendment sent via email and in our packet.
Approval, motion to approve. Barb.
I'll second.
Okay, I'll call for the vote.
Judy, aye.
Barb, aye.
Bethany, aye.
Lynn, aye. Next is the approval of the July 19th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion that we approve the July 19th Planning Commission minutes.
This is Bethany. I'll second.
Call for the vote.
Judy, aye.
Barb, aye.
Bethany, aye.
Lynn, aye. Next, I'll look for a motion to approve the July 19th, 2023 public hearing minutes for ordinance 23-02, commercial design standards.
This is Barb, so moved.
This is Bethany. I'll second.
Call for the vote.
Judy, aye.
Barb, aye.
Bethany, aye.
Lynn, aye. Next, I'll look for a motion for the approval of the July 19th, 2023 public hearing minutes, setback variance 18760 Jennings Street Northeast.
This is Bethany. So moved.
This is Barb, second.
Call for the vote.
Judy, aye.
Barb, aye.
Bethany, aye.
Lynn, aye. Okay, now we have our public hearing, discussion and recommendations for the ordinance 23-05 swimming pool standards and housekeeping amendments. And Eleanor, do you want to read the public hearing notice?
Yep, I can do that. Notice is hereby given that a public hearing will be held at the City of Columbus Planning Commission on August 16th, 2023 at 6 p.m. or as soon thereafter as parties may be heard. The hearing will be conducted in person and by interactive technology at Columbus City Hall, located at 16319 Kettle River Boulevard, Minnesota, to consider a city code amendment to Chapter 7A regulating swimming pool standards. A full copy of the proposed ordinance is available for review during regular business hours in the city administrator's office and at the address listed above or viewed on the city website. Members of the public interested in attending in person, monitoring the meetings, or wanting more information should contact city offices at 651-464-3120 or visit the city website at columbusmn.us. The hearing shall continue until all evidence and testimony has been received.
Thank you. Is there anyone here that would like to address the Planning Commission? Is there anybody online? With that, then I will close the public hearing portion for discussion with the Planning Commission. Any discussion from the Planning Commission? Okay.
But I'll let Bethany go first if you had one.
I did.
You did?
What?
Have a question about the
Swimming
Ordinance?
pool ordinance. That's what we're talking about. Do you have a?
I don't.
I just
think
said I had a
Okay.
question, but I'll let you go first if you had one.
Oh, I did not.
Okay.
Okay.
Did I say I'm confused?
Okay.
Did I say I had a question? Did I give the
kinda
impression that
went
I had a
like-
question?
You went like, oh, like you were going to speak.
Okay, no, good. I'm good. I don't know what that was. Sorry.
Okay. So my question is on the new piece that says they would like to change the adjusting the height of regulated swimming pools from 3 feet to 4 feet, because in standard they're between 3.5 and 4.5, so there wouldn't really be any 3 foot and the half foot wouldn't make a big enough difference to have that.
Yes.
So that, I understand that part, and it does make sense, but my question is, does this include, like, say somebody did one of those pools that's kind of half in and half out, and it's 3 feet, only 3 feet high, then there would be no regulations for that? No fence, cover, gate, or anything?
Okay, so I'm just going to jump in and maybe answer some of your questions. I actually went to the pool store in Blaine and talked with the guy there because I did find out that in Columbus, I do know somebody that has a pool like I had where 3 feet is out of the ground and 2 feet is dug in and it has a deep end. I also know somebody that has a 4-foot round, and the 4-foot round is above ground, but it's dug into the ground where it's 10 feet deep. So we do have those pools in Columbus. So I went and I was talking to him because I had brought up about the fencing that you put on top of it. And they only sell it, the smallest is 3 feet, and it's $720 for 10 panels. And he said a lot of people like those because if they've got kids and they're throwing balls and stuff around, it keeps it contained. He says it's kind of split. A lot of cities have, the standard has been 5 feet, but in some cities are going to 4 feet where they have, neighbors right next to each other and maybe have a fence around it. When you're talking about a gate, you should use the language latchable and lockable. Because pool steps, removing them, a lot of them are not made to be removed. You put them in, they fill up with water, so they're very heavy to get out. Or if you have a little deck area, they're screwed in. What they do sell now, that he sells a lot of, is ladders where the steps fold up. And he recommends people buy bike lock chains and chain the sides so that nobody can come and just put them down and go up. And that pool ladder's $350. And so I asked a lot of questions. I said, pricing. The comment was made, those fences that you put on top could be expensive. His comment was, well, your pool is already expensive, so if you're not willing to put in another $720 or $350 with this ladder, the ladder was slick, but he says, I do tell people to buy the locks to put on it so that it can't come down. And I told them, I said, right now, our language says the ladder must be removed when unattended. And he said, but what is unattended? Is it your home and you're not using it, or you're not home? And he says, there's so, that can be misinterpreted and removing the ladder, like he said, is like almost impossible on most pools. So if you've got like the one couple that's got a 4-foot round and you've got 4 feet and we say you don't need to have anything around it, but it's 10 feet deep. So that's not like it's just 4 feet of water. So do we want to separate the two and have like your hybrid pool? Because that basically is the same as an in-ground pool of 10 feet.
Excuse me, this is Barb. So you're saying that he's saying that the ladders are not removable, the steps?
They are, but when you put them in there, they fill up with water so that they don't float. So it's not a one-person job.
And you would have to do it every time that you're leaving the pool.
If
It's not realistic.
we use that as,
So the verbiage here probably isn't real effective.
I'm just giving us some more information to maybe look at, which I could have kicked myself that I didn't go there before our last meeting and had that to share. But, you know, a gate, like he said, there's some people that have a 4-foot pool and they have steps with a little platform and they have a little fencing around the platform that goes down to a gate. Well, latchable and lockable. So
So I
I
just
don't know
want
if
to,
that sheds any light onto it.
I did just want to say, in my opinion, whether, if it's sticking out 3 or 4 feet and it's 10 more feet below, to me, it doesn't really matter how deep it is because anybody can go in and drown in 3 or 4 feet of water. So I don't know that I would make that differentiation.
You know, he says it's different in the cities where your houses are closer together. They might require a fence for even 3 feet. Out in the country, he says they don't, a lot of cities don't require a fence around it. But, you know, that's where you have to determine, I mean, if we're asking for a hard lockable cover on an in-ground pool, what do we do for above ground that's 10 feet deep? Anybody else want to weigh in? Or do we want to stick with what's here?
Well, I think we had discussed the above ground that goes deeper below ground, and that we were not going to get into hybrids and make things too confusing. I like the terminology of latchable and lockable versus, it just seems cleaner than what we've got. So I would suggest we change that terminology.
Okay.
Anybody else?
That language.
Dean, do you have anything to say?
Do you want me to?
Sure.
I appreciate that there are going to be all kinds of hybrids in a lot of the stuff we do. Whether there's a deep end or it's all one level, we're regulating a height that we want to provide the most protection for people. So whether the 4-foot fence has 3 feet of water at one end and 12 feet at the other, I don't think it's relevant.
Okay.
So I wouldn't go that route. And I agree with Sue's earlier comment. People drown in a foot of water. And so my biggest concern after the council discussed this was that we had this dead zone between 3 feet and 4 feet, especially if somebody had 3 feet 8 inch, and then we say you got to have 4-inch wall extension or whatever. Even though you find that people like to put nets and maybe they'll do that anyway. If we're going to really choose 4 feet, there was nothing magic about the 3 before. And so my suggestion was make it all 4, and we don't regulate anything under that. And so anybody that's got a 3.5-foot fence, they don't have to do anything. They're not part of this ordinance. Anything 4 feet and over is, but there's no additional special requirements. And I think that was the point of some of the debate that's taken place. You don't want to make this so complicated that it drives people nuts or forces them to go and spend a lot of money to just go and have a little summer fun in a pool. So this is a pretty clean standard the way it's written. I'm hearing you about the ladders. I've not heard that that is an issue to pull it out. I only know one family that has a pool like that, and theirs doesn't seem to float away. It's down without having heavy weights, and they just yank it out when they all go inside. You could, if that seemed to be a concern to any of you, add that you have to remove the ladder or have a ladder that is lockable or otherwise securable. I don't know the language, but it's a policy issue you have to debate. Do you need to get into that, or do you just tell people. And then somebody comes in and they have a ladder and it's a two-person job, as you say, and they want an exception to it. Maybe if that happens once every 10 years, you just deal with that when it happens. Okay, there we are.
I have an in-ground pool, I have the stairs that sink down into the pool, easily a two-person job, and I can tell you, my wife and I can't do it.
Excuse me.
believe-
Did I hear you say in-ground or above ground?
In-ground,
Why do you have removable ladders?
what's that? They don't take long.
Huh?
Metal ladders, they take out of in-ground pool,
In the deep end.
keep that, yep.
I think for this particular ordinance for in-ground pools, we don't make you remove the ladders.
Right.
You can take them out, but that's not part of the safety standards. It would just be having
I was
the
just hearing
fence.
it, I thought I was hearing it.
Only affects above ground, which is why I wanted to question. So there is no requirement, but for any in-ground, you either have to have the automatic covers or you got to have a fence. That's what impacts below ground or in-ground. So above ground is what we're really debating here. That's
No,
quite
you're
all
good,
right.
you're good.
That's good.
I have a question now. Is it just a problem with the way that my brain is seeing this, or it feels like anything that's not 4 feet high isn't regulated because it's not defined as a pool,
Yes.
but then it says an above-ground pool has to have a wall of at least 4 feet. So then if it is like 3 feet 8, like you said, doesn't meet the, it has to be 4 feet tall ordinance, but it's also not considered a pool, so it doesn't matter. So then it's
So-
fine?
So what are we doing with 3-foot walls? Nothing?
Or 2-foot walls?
Or, yeah,
If it's a 4-foot wall, they meet the requirement for having a 4-foot wall, and there's nothing that's required to be added.
okay.
If they have 3 feet and 11 inches, there is no requirement.
That feels weird to me. That feels kind of backwards, like it's not like, it's like a
you're-
self-conflict, it's like a conflicts with itself.
Well, that's why I recommended you change it from a 3 feet depth. If you're going to regulate, first of all, we started at 5 feet and we dropped it to 4 feet.
Yep.
And again, I don't have a technical or personal issue with any of that. It's just that now all of a sudden you created a situation where if you had a 3 feet 11 inch, somebody's got to add 1 inch to meet this ordinance requirement. That's 4 feet non-climbable. Where do you draw the line? 3 feet, you'd say, well, why can't they add a foot? But if it's 3 feet and 11 inches, whatever that difference is, below what we're regulating, then you consider changing what is the threshold for regulation. And I think Sue's question, is everything below 4 feet safe? Of course not. 1 foot isn't safe, so 3 feet isn't. This whole issue started about non-climbable, and you've decided that 4 feet is non-climbable. That's basically what this ordinance says. And so my comment is, then we shouldn't have a definition of an above-ground pool at 3 feet depth. It ought to be 4 feet. It really should. And then you're not regulating anything under 4 feet, period.
So if you're not regulating under 4 feet, why have an ordinance that says it has to be 4 feet tall? That's what I'm confused about.
It's the definition of a above-ground pool includes that it's at least 10,000 gallons and 4 feet or more. And that's what you're regulating. When we started this, we were at 5 feet, and so if somebody had a 4-foot pool or 3 foot, you had to add 1 feet or 2 feet to get to that non-climbable.
Yeah.
When we back down to the 4-foot dimension as the non-climbable, the safety issue, my feeling was you create a morass of confusion if you have that half a foot below 4 feet that you're asking somebody to come, or 2 inches, to put something up that makes it 4 feet. So my only suggestion is have your regulation of a pool and that definition at the same level. And the consequence is that you're not regulating anything under 4 feet. You're not requiring anybody that has a 3.5 foot or 5 foot pool to put any extensions on.
I'm with you, and to me, they're all dangerous. I wish there was I mean, do we have to regulate the height and all of that? Can't we just hold the resident responsible? I mean, isn't there some ordinance where you can say, you put a pool in, it's your responsibility?
Well, here's another kink in it is, are we going to regulate gallons or are we going to regulate how high the pool is? Because there are 3-foot pools that are over 5,000 gallons. So now, but we don't regulate it because it's not 4 feet, but it's over the gallons.
Yeah, and I don't care what the gallon threshold is. We were talking about having something that exempted virtually all spas, hot tubs and all that. You don't want to get into that regulation? Nobody, no city that I'm aware of, requires fences or safety mechanisms. Everyone I've been into, the kids climb in and out of there routinely, and you just don't want to do it. So the 10,000 was enough to eliminate that category from any regulation. When our original description was 10,000 gallons or 3 feet depth, when you had a 5-foot standard, it was like, okay, so anybody that's got a 3-foot pool now has to put 2 feet to get up to your 1 foot. And when the council debated this and changed the dimension down to 4 feet, and Eleanor and I both looked at, standard pools, and there's a lot of them in the 3.5 to 4.5 foot range, a lot. And so do you want to require somebody with 6 inches of extensions? And that's where I say no. Put your threshold for regulation the same as your minimum height of the pool for the safety purpose, and nobody's trapped in the middle. That was my feeling. And I caught this after the public hearing had to be created after the notice went in the paper, and so that's a change in the current draft that you see. And if you're not comfortable with that, keep debating it and change it back to the way it was.
So are you this says 5,000 gallons.
Oh,
And you keep saying 10.
Yeah, I do have a clarification about that. The sort of introduction, that's what triggers the need, that's what triggers the need for a swimming pool permit. So, for example, a hot tub, which would be under 5,000 gallons, but over the 4 foot, because you have some tall hot tubs, that you got to climb into, wouldn't need a swimming pool permit. And then for you, Bethany, these rules are the rules that you have to follow once you get into that swimming pool permit process, if that kind of makes sense. That's why it's split up that way. So currently, you would only need the permit and therefore follow those rules if it is 5,000 gallons and taller and a depth greater than 4 feet. So if it's 10,000 gallons and only 2 feet tall, we are not regulating it. You don't require a permit for it. If it's less than 5,000 gallons and 6 feet tall, I don't know why you'd have that, but we're not regulating that. It's the combination of two because that is the most common area in which swimming pools that you think of swimming pools fall into. Yes, there are exceptions, but a lot of those are hot tubs and spas, and that's a different thing entirely to regulate. There are going to be short lap pools that have more gallons than what we're regulating, and you're going to have tall spas that have less gallons, but we're not regulating those things.
So I have one clarification question. In the example that we were talking about before where, it's halfway hybrid, halfway underground, part over, could those be in-ground pools? And then they would have to comply to the regulations for an in-ground pool.
Yes, we talked about that last time, the last planning commission meeting. Currently, it is, swimming pool, what's that one?
It's in the above ground definition.
It's currently in the above ground. That would be an above ground pool.
Okay.
If you'd like, we talked about switching it where if it's in any way dug below, it would be considered an in-ground, and then in that case, you would need a fence because it would be under those in-ground regulations. That is something that we can talk about. But currently, a hybrid that's dug under would be considered an above ground, and so if it's like 3.5 feet tall and dug in, it wouldn't be regulated.
Okay.
Well, this is
Right,
Barb.
that seems silly. Sorry.
A question for Dean. Do all cities that are the size of Columbus have swimming pool ordinances?
I can't answer that. I don't know every city, but most urban communities have some form of regulation. 5 feet fence has been a standard in many states for a long time. And it's only been in the last 15, 20 years that the pool covers came out as an alternative to that. I don't know. I've not worked with many communities that do above ground regulation.
Well, these are relatively new, that everybody's got these
What?
48-inch
What's new?
height, or 50, you see, there are 3 of them in my neighborhood.
Yeah, so the guy at the pool store said years ago, it was 5-foot fence around every pool. But now the covers have come out and they've gotten kind of elaborate, and so some people are putting covers on it. He says, your city, where homes are closer together, people are still putting up fences because they want privacy, whatever. He says, you have like Egan, who is a lot of city, but also encompasses some rural area. They require, he says, 5-foot fence around anything that isn't 5 feet tall. If you have a 5-foot tall pool, then you don't have to put a fence around it. So,
And that's in Eden.
huh?
So all
Yeah.
of these pools that are under 5 feet that we see in everybody's yard would in Egan require a fence. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's what's bothering me. I mean, pools have always been an attractive nuisance.
But that's because they have a city, though. He says,
That's why I
Yeah.
ask about smaller towns.
Yeah.
I mean, should the city really be required to regulate this in such detail? I mean, it isn't the city's responsibility if somebody drowns. And so regulating how many inches that they should have seems to me pointless, because if somebody gets in that pool, no matter what, they're going to drown if there's no fence around it. And I'm talking about kids and animals and stuff like that, So to me, it just, you're making rules for a certain size pool, and all of the others are still a danger out there. Like I say, there's 3 within walking distance of my place. One person puts a tarp over it, the other 2 do not.
I like what he said at the pool store about Egan, and you can do it with 4 feet or you can do it with 5 feet. If your pool isn't that height, then you have to have a fence around it. If we say 4 feet, so 4 and 5-foot pools don't. It's not that you don't regulate them. They're regulating everything. If your pool is 3 feet high or you dig it into the ground and 3 feet is above, you have to have a fence.
Are there any state laws regarding pools?
Not for residential.
Pardon me?
Commercial pools, yes.
Yeah, I don't think that the building code gets into the fencing standards they did like 40 years ago, and they just washed their hands of it and said, let the locals deal with it. So what would be the cutoff? I'm hearing what you're saying, Barb. What becomes the cutoff Again, somebody's got a 12-foot diameter, 12-inch tall pool. Somebody's got a 14-foot, 14-inch tall. Those are going to require fences too? I mean,
No,
it gets-
most of those people empty them each time. You know, if you don't have a filtration system, you're just swimming in a pool of bacteria.
But if you don't change it for a week, I mean, the bottom line.
Then you're taking a risk on
There-
getting all
there
kinds
is a
of.
risk in anything that's on here.
Yeah.
And Sue said it, we've all said it, is that our responsibility?
Right.
Well, that's what I'm saying about the whole thing. Why should we be regulating any of them? I mean, isn't there a simpler way to make people responsible for their own pool rather than the city?
And fortunately, there aren't that many tragedies. I mean,
Right, right,
it's a low number.
right.
I work in a lot of rural communities where sand and gravel mining is a big deal. There's a lot of communities that don't require fencing around those.
Exactly.
You talk about an attractive nuisance, and especially if it's rock instead of sand and gravel, you have a steep drop, and kids do go in there because it's a cool place to be, and that's very harmful. And yet,
Yep.
some communities choose not to regulate with fencing those. So this is pure policy, and again, I don't have all the answers.
I appreciate it.
Eleanor does. She finished this ordinance for you, so.
This one is
So-
my draft, so.
So we require a permit if it's over 5,000 gallons, right?
And currently, the way it's written, not in this draft, but how it's published, it would be if it's 5,000 gallons and over 3 feet tall, or in depth,
Okay.
whether in ground or above ground. That's when we require the permit.
And 4 feet.
Now, the proposed change is 5,000 gallons and 4 feet in depth.
But currently it's 3 feet.
Yes.
I understand what I was confused about now, just so you know.
Did I help confuse you?
Well, I just read it more closely because we had spent so much time arguing how tall does the wall have to be that I thought this ordinance over here, the K3 or whatever, was saying like it's got to be 4 feet tall. Like that was the spirit of that piece of information, is like has to be 4 feet so that nobody can get in. So I'm like, if it has to be 4 feet, but then nothing under 4 feet is regulated, then it doesn't have to be 4 feet. That was the confusion.
Yeah, and
But
so
it doesn't have to be 4 feet.
if it's.
But
3
if it
feet
is,
o-
then it's regulated.
If it's 3 feet 11, it really isn't an issue. We're not going to be permitting those, I presume.
Right.
And so you don't have a situation where the building code provision that any platform over 30 inches has to have a railing. That still applies, but we're not regulating it. And so there's a potential violation of the building code that somebody puts a deck on a 3 feet, 11-inch pool that we don't go, and they don't have a railing around it. Is that our problem?
Right.
We're not going to get everything.
Right.
And again, I think the spirit of this was you wanted to try and simplify it and yet maintain some integrity that we hold people responsible.
No, because the only ones that are going to get looked at are the ones that apply for a permit. They're the only ones that the building inspector is going to go and look at. So you can be as loose as you want to be, or you can be as strict as you want to be, because that 3 foot 11 inches, and they have a deck around it and no railing, there's no permit needed.
Nope,
So it's a free-for-all.
it's still a code violation, but I can tell you so many
Right.
porches and additions that go on homes,
Right.
which are all being permitted and so forth, get overlooked for the railing requirement, but that is a code requirement, not a zoning requirement. We added that in here for those that we know we are regulating, but we just can't enforce regulations on everything. We're not gonna see them. And Egan is so different than
Right.
here because you got 5-acre parcels and they got 8,000 square feet
Yeah.
parcels. And by the way, I used to work down there, so they don't have any more rural land in Egan. It's just parks.
Right, he was just
Or the zoo.
using that as an
Or no,
example.
Zoo is in Apple Valley.
So, of, what to look for, but I appreciated his time. I thought his latchable and lockable language was worth looking at. And, I mean, 5,000 gallons, and I looked it up, 3-foot pools are 5,000 gallons. So your gallons and the height of the fence are so far off from what they hold that, and like I said, the only ones that are gonna get looked at are the ones that pull a permit, so we can't regulate everything. But like he said, if you're gonna spend the money to buy a pool, why wouldn't, I mean, the $720 for that 3-foot fence, he says, that's nothing compared to what you spend buying the pool, so. And I went on a hot day and wished I would have worn my swimsuit, because they had pools up and running.
Well, and this is Barb, you'll remember that a resident did call in because she was concerned that she was going to have a permit. And I believe her question was answered that her pool wasn't tall enough, so she didn't have to have a permit. So to me, it's confusing for people.
Well, that's another question I did ask him, is if you buy a pool and you have it installed by them, I said, do you go get the permit? And he said, no, that's on the homeowners. So just sharing my information.
The only thing I think is that if you can have a 2-foot wall and a 10-foot deep pool currently and not require anything else, that's the only thing that feels like it might need to be looked at. The rest, I'm like, yeah, there's just, you could argue for the rest of our lives about,
Right.
But I don't think that somebody should be able to put a pool part of the way in the ground, have it 10 feet deep, 2 feet tall, and then that's,
So, re-looking at that definition, it says a this is something that I was going to bring up. Right now, it says a depth greater than 4 feet, and we're going to change it to 4 feet or greater, so it's more standard. But if it's 10 feet deep and 5,000 gallons, that's a regulated pool. And
right,
so
but
we
it wouldn't need any sort of,
So
it would have to be 4.
it would need to have a 4-foot, sorry, I just thought of this now, a 4-foot sidewall or a 4-foot fence around it. Because
Sure.
it has a depth greater than 4 feet, so we're regulating it, even if most of it's underground and there's 2 feet above. And it's over 5,000 gallons, so it will need a permit. And in this list of things, it can either have a 4-foot sidewall, it doesn't, so it needs a 4-foot fence. If that helps clarify things.
Yes, that clarifies it for me. Thank
Okay,
you.
perfect.
Then I would leave it the way you have it, except for what you mentioned about just adding latchable and lockable. I don't think that's an issue to add that.
Yeah, I like that language. I can do that.
Yeah, so just to kind of kick off what you were just talking about, when I lived in North St. Paul, and I dug my pool into the ground and I had a deep end, I had 2 feet that stood above ground. They considered that an in-ground pool because it had a deep end, and I had to put a 5-foot fence up from the water level. So the water level was like right at the ground, so I had to go from water level up with a 5-foot fence because it was considered an in-ground pool now because it had a deep end. And it held 30,000 gallons of water. So.
I would agree with that. I have a deep end in my pool. There's
Yeah. So that's my whole twist to it, is I don't like not regulating if it's only 2 feet above and it's dug in. But
But I do think, yeah, like you were saying, it is by definition regulated. So,
but by gallons, it would be, so.
To make that situation work, we will have to tweak the definitions of in-ground and above-ground swimming pools on the first page to more clearly consider those dug in as in-ground swimming pools, so it triggers that fence, because it is something that we're regulating, because it's 5,000 gallons and a depth greater of 4 feet. We just don't have anything specific written about it, and so we can make sure that they're included in that to trigger them needing a fence.
right, even if all you said was all in-ground or partially in-ground pools, right? Wouldn't that
Yes.
do it?
Yeah, that would do it.
Okay. Everybody okay with that?
Fine with me.
So then, does it go back to be revised and then comes back again to be approved?
Or does it get revised and go right to the council?
I think you would,
May,
In this particular case, if you're making that recommendation, we would edit it in between going to, from the planning commission to the council.
Okay.
how do we word that one up? I make a motion that we approve this document.
Ordinance 23.
That one.
Yeah.
With the recommended changes in terminology.
This is Bethany, I'll second.
Call for the vote.
Judy, aye?
Barb, nay.
Bethany, aye.
Lynn, aye. Okay. Now it's time for public open forum, if anybody would like to address the planning commission. Anybody online? Okay. Planning commissioners report. Does anybody have anything? I would just remind everybody that the Fall Fest is September 15th, 16th, and 17th, and we are looking for volunteers. So if you'd like to volunteer and you haven't, see Janet Hagelin and she'll put you on the list.
Oh, good, very good.
Okay. Anybody else have anything?
I have nothing.
Okay. City administrator.
Just like to tell the planning commission that at your next meeting, there's a possibility of 2 hearings, 2 applications. So it will be a regular meeting. And then at the September 20th meeting, we will continue with our residential zone business discussion. And that will be a joint meeting. So we'll do applications. And then on the 20th, there might be one that you do discussion on, because it's a brand-new application. Others are just either a renewal or something that you've seen before.
And this is in September?
This was in September, yes.
Okay.
I know, it's hard to talk about September when we're in August, but we're we're working September calendar.
Any planning or zoning tech report?
Nothing at this time, no.
Okay. Well, it is 6:46, and this meeting of the Planning Commission for August 16th, 2023 is adjourned.
Motion.
Oh, motion first,
I'll
sorry.
make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Judy, aye?
Barb, aye.
Bethany, aye.
Lynn, I adjourned.